Olivia's husband handed her divorce papers on Christmas morning. His mother threw champagne across her face, cold, sharp, humiliating, while the rest of the Hartwell family actually cheered. And standing beside him, wearing the delicate gold necklace Olivia had bought her months earlier, was her own best friend. They all thought she'd disappear quietly, slip out of their perfect holiday like an unwanted ornament. What none of them knew was that Olivia had been preparing for this moment for months, meticulously, patiently, ruthlessly. Before this story unfolds, smash that subscribe button, because what's coming is betrayal, a twist no one saw coming, and a revenge so calculated it left an entire family begging for mercy. Olivia didn't move at first. She stood perfectly still, champagne sliding down her cheek in a slow, humiliating trail, yet her expression remained unreadable. Too calm for the spectacle unfolding around her, too steady for a woman being discarded in front of a cheering audience. Daniel mistook that stillness for shock. He always did mistake silence for weakness. He cleared his throat, straightening the lapels of his tailored winter blazer, as if this were a business meeting he needed to assert control over. "It's better this way," he told her, quiet, rehearsed, cowardly. "Let's end things gracefully." Graceful. He said it like the word had any place in what they'd just done to her. Margaret Hartwell, positioned beside the fireplace like a queen presiding over a tribunal, lifted her chin with a satisfied smile. "You'll handle this with maturity, Olivia," she said, her voice insulated with honeyed superiority. "No tantrums. It's Christmas, after all." The Hartwell cousins murmured their agreement. A few exchanged smirks, the kind that traveled across a room like sparks looking for fuel. Their holiday gathering had just turned into entertainment, and Olivia, the woman who'd given this family everything, had become their favorite spectacle. Then came the soft, almost taunting click of heels behind her. "Lily." Olivia didn't turn, not immediately. She didn't need to. She recognized that perfume, warm vanilla and cheap arrogance. And she knew, without seeing it, the smug little smile Lily always wore when she thought she'd won. When Olivia finally glanced over her shoulder, Lily was standing far too close to Daniel, angled toward him, chin tilted, one manicured hand resting playfully against the necklace Olivia had once clasped around her best friend's throat. A gift from a time Olivia had believed loyalty still meant something. The betrayal sat in the air, heavy, sour, undeniable. "Olivia," Lily said softly, voice dripping false sympathy. "I hope you understand. This was the right decision for everyone." Everyone, except the woman being humiliated. Olivia met her eyes, calm, too calm, and something in Lily flickered, just for a second. A hesitation, a ripple of discomfort. Because Olivia wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't falling apart like they expected. She simply whispered, "Is that so?" Daniel shifted beside Lily, suddenly less confident, as though he realized the silence in the room had changed. It no longer belonged to shock but to something far sharper, something beneath Olivia's surface that none of them had noticed until now. The Hartwells watched her closely, waiting for the collapse that would justify their cruelty. But Olivia didn't crumble. She straightened. Champagne still clung to her skin, her hair was damp, her heart was pounding, but she lifted her chin with a quiet, unnerving steadiness. The kind of steadiness that made Daniel swallow. The kind of steadiness that made Margaret narrow her eyes. The kind of steadiness that told everyone in that glittering living room, something was off. "Thank you for the clarity," Olivia said, voice even, breath smooth. "I've been needing it." A strange shift rippled through the room, subtle, but unmistakable. Because for the first time that morning, the Hartwells seemed uneasy, as if they had just realized they were no longer watching a victim but someone who knew more than she let on. Someone who had been waiting. And outside, behind the frosted windows of the Hartwell mansion, snow began to fall in heavy, silent sheets, quietly blanketing the world as Olivia prepared to rewrite hers. The room hadn't realized it yet, but Christmas morning had already shifted. Something small but sharp had slipped beneath the Hartwell family's perfect surface, and its name was Olivia. Daniel tried to regain control, stepping closer as if proximity would soften the cruelty of what he'd done. "There's no need to drag this out," he murmured, a gentle tone layered over impatience. "We can settle everything quickly. Property, finances, the house in Aspen Hills." "The house?" Olivia repeated, her voice soft enough to make him pause. For the first time, she looked directly at him, no tremble, no brokenness, just a quiet, piercing clarity. Daniel hesitated. "We discussed this. You can stay until the paperwork is finalized." The lie was so thin it practically tore in the air between them. Margaret stepped in before Olivia could respond. She won't be staying here. Each word landed like a slap. A guest room is for family, real family, not placeholders. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Champagne glasses clinked in a tone-deaf chorus of cruelty. Olivia barely reacted, though a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth, gone before anyone could decide whether they'd truly seen it. Lily noticed. Lily's breath caught. Lily stepped back, because Olivia wasn't supposed to smile. And that smile, quiet, subtle, unnervingly controlled, held too much knowledge. Too much intention. Daniel cleared his throat again, harder this time. "Let's keep things civil," he said, though his eyes flicked toward Olivia's hands, as if expecting something to crack. Nothing cracked. Not her voice. Not her posture. Not her dignity. What cracked instead, softly, invisibly, was Daniel's composure. Olivia stepped forward then, brushing a stray droplet of champagne from her jawline with the back of her finger, her movements slow and deliberate. The room watched her like she was a match someone had just struck too close to a fuse. "Daniel," she said quietly, not pleading, not accusing, just stating. "Do you want to ask me why I'm not surprised?" His brow creased. Margaret stiffened. Lily's hand dropped from the necklace. Because until that moment, none of them had considered the possibility that Olivia already knew. That maybe she'd known for longer than they assumed. That maybe she'd prepared for this, prepared in ways they would not understand until it was far too late. Daniel opened his mouth, but Olivia continued before he could shape a sound. "Let's not pretend this morning is spontaneous." Her tone stayed polite, almost gentle, yet it cut like glass. "You didn't think of all this over breakfast." Margaret snapped, "Don't be dramatic." But Olivia didn't even acknowledge her. She kept her gaze locked on Daniel, who was shifting again, tiny movements, but telling. Because Daniel had always been a bad liar. And Olivia had always been patient enough to notice patterns. She picked up the divorce papers with 2 fingers, holding them lightly, delicately, as though the document were nothing more than a holiday card. She skimmed the pages, eyes moving silently. Every clause, every timestamp, every legal detail she had already seen weeks ago. "Your lawyer works fast," she murmured, offering the papers back. "Or did he prepare these before Thanksgiving?" Silence dropped across the room, heavy and suffocating. Lily's inhale was sharp. Someone's glass slipped slightly in their grip. Even the fireplace crackled at the wrong time. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, not without unraveling the entire performance. And Olivia finally released the smallest exhale. "Good," she said, folding her hands calmly. "Then we can proceed. Efficiently." Efficient wasn't the word they expected. Efficient wasn't the word a devastated, blindsided wife used. Efficient wasn't the word someone uses unless they've been waiting for the exact moment the trap closes. Margaret frowned, sensing something she couldn't articulate. "Why are you speaking like this?" she demanded. "What are you implying?" Olivia lifted her eyes, slow, steady, unnervingly clear. "I'm implying," she said, "that you've underestimated me." No shout. No tears. No theatrics. Just 6 quiet words that sliced through the entire Hartwell living room. And for the first time that morning, Daniel wasn't the man ending a marriage. He was a man who'd just realized he didn't know the woman he married. Not at all. Daniel stared at her as though the floor had shifted beneath him. The others felt it too, an unease sliding across the room, subtle but undeniable, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Olivia didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't rush. She simply stood there, hands folded lightly, expression calm, too calm for a woman whose marriage had just been theatrically destroyed in front of an audience. "Underestimated you," Daniel repeated, voice tight, almost brittle. "Olivia, what are you talking about?" But it wasn't really a question. It was fear pretending to be confusion. Olivia tilted her head slightly, studying him for a quiet, measured moment. "You didn't think I'd notice the meetings," she said. "The phone calls. The weekends you claimed to be traveling for work." A pause, smooth, effortless. "But I did." Lily flinched hard enough that even the cousins noticed. Margaret shot her a warning glance, but Lily's composure had already cracked. She looked like a witness suddenly realizing she was standing too close to the defendant. Daniel straightened his shoulders, trying to recover ground he no longer had. "This isn't necessary," he attempted, dismissive, strained. "There's no need to rehash." "You're right." Olivia cut in softly, almost kindly. "There's no need. Because I'm not here to fight for you. That silence, that single, cold, clean silence, washed over the whole room. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, then stayed shut as if he'd forgotten how sentences worked. Olivia stepped forward just enough to force him to take an involuntary half-step back. Not much. Not dramatic. Just enough that everyone saw it. She doesn't get to intimidate us, Margaret snapped, furious at the shift. Daniel, make her leave if she's going to cause trouble. Olivia didn't even acknowledge her. She kept her eyes locked on Daniel, steady, calm, unsettling. When you lie to someone long enough, she said, voice low but clear, you forget they can lie back. Daniel's pulse flickered in his neck. Lily paled. The cousins stopped smirking. Margaret's grip tightened around her empty champagne flute. Because that sentence, that one sentence, wasn't the reaction they expected from the woman they believed they could break in public. It held too much awareness. Too much certainty. Too much implication. What did you do? Daniel asked, barely above a whisper. Olivia didn't answer immediately. She walked past him instead, slow, composed, moving toward the Christmas tree glowing quietly in the corner. Lights blinked across the ornaments she had hung herself. Gifts she had wrapped. Effort she had given a family that never wanted more from her than silence. She knelt down, picked up one box wrapped in burgundy velvet paper and held it lightly in her palm. No one spoke. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace behind her. This was supposed to be your gift, she said, glancing at Daniel. I finished it 3 months ago. Daniel swallowed. Olivia. But now, she continued, rising with the box still in hand, it belongs to someone else. Margaret snapped. Stop speaking in riddles. What have you done? Olivia turned to her then, finally acknowledging her, eyes calm, voice lower, almost gentle. I didn't do anything to you, she said. Not yet. Not yet. 2 simple words. Immediate impact. A ripple shot through the room, fear clothed as indignation. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel stepped forward, desperate to regain control. Olivia, whatever you think, whatever you believe you've uncovered, it doesn't have to be hostile. We're adults. We are, Olivia agreed. Which is why I won't be staying in this house another minute. Lily exhaled, relieved for reasons she shouldn't have been. But Olivia wasn't finished. I'm not storming out, she added, voice steady. I'm walking out on my terms. Then she looked directly at Daniel, calm, composed, terrifying. And you should prepare yourself, Daniel. Because once I step outside that door, this morning becomes the least painful part of your year. He froze. Margaret stiffened. Lily looked like she might be sick. Because Olivia wasn't threatening them. She was promising something. And promises delivered by a silent, calculating woman never land softly. The room stayed painfully still, as if the air itself had stopped breathing. Aurora didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness was more terrifying than any scream. Behind her, the twin screens glowed, frozen on the image of Chase Henderson, shirtless, sloppy, terrified, caught red-handed on the night he insisted he was working late. Aurora took one step forward. Before we continue, she said, her tone cool as carved ice, I should clarify something. You all spent years convincing me I was small, weak, dependent, disposable. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest smile touching her lips. But here's the thing about people you underestimate, they watch everything. Her words rippled across the room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at Chase as if seeing him for the first time. Chase finally found his voice. Aurora, please, this is humiliating. You don't have to do this here. She turned to him slowly. Chase, you handed me divorce papers on Christmas morning. Your mother threw champagne in my face. Your family clapped. And you expected my humiliation to stay private. She raised her eyebrows. No. Tonight, we balance the scales. His mother, Eleanor, stepped forward, trembling with indignation. This is slander. You manipulated those videos. Aurora tapped her wrist, and the screen switched again, this time to a date-stamped email chain from Eleanor to the family lawyer, projected in massive, unforgiving clarity. Eleanor gasped so loudly a few guests flinched. You planned, Aurora said softly, to cut me out of everything. Even the apartment I renovated. Even the savings I contributed to. And you conspired to hide the funds Chase siphoned from our joint account. She looked around the room at the stunned crowd. Shall I scroll? Eleanor's entire face collapsed. Stop. Please. But Aurora wasn't done. Another click. A third screen lit up. This one showed bank statements, tens of thousands transferred from Aurora's name into Chase's private account. Chase staggered back. Aurora, where did you get those? I changed all the passwords. Exactly, she said. You locked me out. But you forgot something important. She took a small remote from her pocket and held it up. Everything you tried to hide was synced to the cloud I created when I set up your accounts. Years ago. She shrugged lightly. I guess loyalty is easier to fake than competence. The room erupted in whispers. A senator's wife shook her head. My God, the audacity. A businessman muttered. He used her money to fund his affairs. A young woman whispered, not softly enough, she's dismantling them like a corporation. Aurora didn't revel in their shock. She wasn't doing this for applause. This was the moment she had earned. The moment she had bled for. The moment they thought she wasn't smart enough to reach. She motioned to the security team, not aggressively, but decisively. Please escort Mrs. Henderson Sr. and her sons from the stage, she said. Eleanor shrieked. Chase swore. The brothers sputtered. But security didn't hesitate. They lifted each of them gently but firmly. As they were led through the crowd, something extraordinary happened. The entire ballroom parted for Aurora. Not because of fear. Because they were witnessing the rise of someone who had been buried alive and crawled her way out with diamonds in her teeth. Aurora stepped back to the center of the stage. We're not done, she said, her voice lowering, drawing the room in. I still need to show you why this family fought so hard to silence me. A tension so sharp it could cut glass stretched across the room. The guests leaned in. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum. Aurora lifted her hand toward the screen. Let's continue. And the next file began to load. The final file finished loading, and the ballroom fell utterly silent. Every guest leaned closer, instinctively knowing this was no longer about infidelity or stolen money. This was bigger, darker, the kind of secret a powerful family doesn't just hide. They bury. Aurora didn't step away from the screen. She stared at it calmly, almost mournfully, as if she was preparing the room for a truth too heavy to drop without warning. When Chase and I first married, she began, her voice steady, I was naive. I thought his family only cared about status. I didn't realize they had reasons, dangerous reasons, to keep outsiders from knowing the truth. She tapped the remote. A document appeared. A confidential audit report, marked with the Henderson family crest. The header read, Unauthorized investment activities, internal findings. A murmur swept the crowd. A few of the wealthier guests froze. They recognized the phrasing. This, Aurora said, was the report Chase and Eleanor would have destroyed if I hadn't backed it up months ago. A second tap. The report zoomed in on 3 damning lines. Funds redirected through shell charities. Donor money laundered through the Henderson Foundation. Personal accounts linked to illegal offshore transfers. Gasps filled the room like a breaking wave. Someone whispered, this could bring down the entire foundation. Aurora continued, her voice calm but cutting. While they were calling me ungrateful, they were stealing from the very charity events they pretended to care about. She looked at the guests, politicians, CEOs, philanthropists, many of whom had donated millions to the Henderson Foundation. Your money, she said, never reached the hospitals, or the food banks, or the scholarship programs. She let that sink in. Chase's youngest brother, Miles, burst through the security line, face red with fury. She's lying. She forged everything. Aurora didn't even turn. Another tap. A video opened. Security camera footage. Miles. Late at night. In the foundation office. Carrying boxes of shredded documents. And right beside him, Eleanor Henderson, in a silk robe, whispering to him fiercely. The audio kicked in. Get rid of it before the audit, Eleanor hissed. If that girl keeps snooping, she'll ruin us. Miles froze mid-charge. The crowd erupted. Even the orchestra musicians set down their instruments. Late at night, in the foundation office, carrying boxes of shredded documents. And right beside him, Eleanor Henderson, in a silk robe, whispering to him fiercely. The audio kicked in. Get rid of it before the audit, Eleanor hissed. If that girl keeps snooping, she'll ruin us. Miles froze mid-charge. The crowd erupted. Even the orchestra musicians set down their instruments. Aurora still hadn't raised her voice. You thought I was snooping, she said to Miles. I was protecting myself. I knew something was wrong long before Chase filed for divorce. Her hand tightened around the remote. And that brings me to the part you all need to hear. A new video opened. This one was taken on a phone. Shaky. Secretly recorded. Chase's voice filled the ballroom. We can't let Aurora get access to the accounts. If she finds the transfers, it's over. She'll go to the board. A pause. Then Eleanor's cold response. Then make her look unstable. Push her out before she talks. A collective gasp. A woman near the front whispered. They planned to smear her. Another added. She would have taken the fall. Aurora finally turned her gaze to the crowd. Steady, unbroken. The divorce wasn't about a mistress, she said softly. It was about silencing me. Making sure the only person who suspected the truth disappeared quietly. Her next words dropped like thunder. They didn't cheat because they fell out of love. She looked straight at Chase. They cheated because ruining my reputation was part of their strategy. The ballroom felt the shift. From scandal to conspiracy. And Aurora held the room in the palm of her hand. Everything you've seen tonight, she said, is already in the hands of federal investigators. Gasps again. This time sharper. Far across the room, someone whispered, they are finished. Aurora exhaled once, slow. Controlled. And now, she said, I want you to see the final recording. The one that proves exactly how far they were willing to go. The lights dimmed slightly as the last video began to load. The room braced. Aurora didn't move. This was the moment everything turned. The last video finished buffering, the blue progress bar creeping across the ballroom screen like a fuse about to ignite. The room went unnervingly still. Not a breath, not a whisper, not even the faint clink of a champagne glass broke the tension. It felt as if the walls themselves leaned forward to listen. Aurora didn't move, her posture calm, almost regal, as if she'd already accepted the destruction this next piece of evidence would unleash. The footage opened in a dim office, time-stamped 4 months before Christmas. Chase sat behind his desk, jaw tight, tapping a pen nervously against a folder. Across from him stood Dr. Vance, the family's long-trusted physician. The one who'd treated Aurora during her fainting spells, the one Eleanor recommended when Aurora complained of fatigue, the one who insisted her symptoms were stress. Aurora had known something was off from the first moment the doctor appeared unannounced in her home, clipboard ready, prescriptions already written. Now, she finally understood why. The audio crackled, then became painfully clear. Are the dosages set? Chase asked. Dr. Vance nodded stiffly. It'll mimic anxiety, paranoia, enough for the courts to question her reliability. No one will think she's unstable, just emotional. Eleanor's voice cut in from off-screen. Good. Once she's discredited, she'll sign whatever papers we put in front of her. A collective gasp swept the ballroom like a gust of cold wind. One of the donors covered her mouth. Another shook his head as if refusing to believe what he'd heard. Several guests stepped back from the Henderson family as though corruption might be contagious. Aurora's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. This, she said quietly, is what they gave me under the guise of a vitamin D supplement. Gasps grew louder. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered. They tried to medically sabotage her. Aurora lifted a slim folder from a nearby table, opening it with the same care one might use for a fragile artifact. These are my medical test results, independent tests I had done without their knowledge. I found traces of the unauthorized sedative 3 months before the divorce papers arrived. She held up the lab report, her voice steady. They wanted the world to believe I was losing my mind. Meanwhile, they were laundering millions and needed a scapegoat before the audit. The ballroom erupted in furious murmurs, the polished veneer of holiday elegance shattering under the weight of the truth. Chase stumbled forward, his voice cracking with panic. Aurora, enough, this is out of context, you don't understand. She turned her head slightly, just enough to cut him off. The federal agents understood it perfectly. The lights flickered as the screen switched to a new image. An email exchange. Chase. Eleanor. Dr. Vance. Subject line. Contingency plan for A. Message excerpts. Her breakdown needs to look organic. Public sympathy must stay with the foundation. Once she's legally compromised, we move forward with the audit narrative. The room gasped again, this time with outrage, not shock. A father of 2 near the front muttered. They were setting her up for a mental collapse. A board member whispered to his wife, this is criminal. Aurora finally stepped away from the screen, letting the damning evidence speak for itself. This was the plan, she said softly, almost sorrowfully. Not just to betray me. Not just to replace me. But to destroy me. Chase's face twisted. Guilt, fear, fury tangled together. Aurora, please, Just talk to me. She didn't stop walking. She passed him with the calm of someone who'd already won. Talk, she said, pausing only long enough to look him in the eye. You planned my downfall like a business strategy. You don't get to ask for conversation. At the far corner of the ballroom, security radios crackled, urgent, overlapping voices. An agent stepped forward, flashing a badge. Chase Henderson? Eleanor Henderson? Dr. Calvin Vance. A ripple spread across the room, astonishment, dread, fascination. Aurora didn't turn back. She stood with her hands clasped lightly in front of her, serene in the chaos. The agent continued, voice firm. You're under federal investigation. We need you to come with us. Miles, breathless, sweating, tried to intervene. You can't just, this is a private event. The agent's stare was cold. We have reason to believe all three individuals attempted medical coercion, financial fraud, and obstruction of an active audit. Shock hit the room like a silent explosion. Eleanor's face went pale. Chase took a stumbling step backward. Dr. Vance's hands shook visibly. Aurora stood still, watching the empire that had tried to erase her finally fall apart. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. Because one last revelation remained, a truth she had held back, the one that would decide who rose from the ashes of this scandal. And who never would again. The ballroom had transformed into a storm, security rushing forward, agents escorting Chase and Eleanor toward the exit, panicked whispers rising like frantic birds, guests stepping back as if the Henderson name itself might explode. And through all of it, Aurora remained still, centered, unshaken, the one calm point in a room unraveling. But inside, she felt the shift. This wasn't the end. Not yet. There was one truth she had carried alone, quietly, fiercely. Because if she revealed it too soon, the Hendersons would have twisted it, weaponized it, buried it the same way they buried every inconvenient fact. Now, though, with their empire collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses, the timing was perfect. As federal agents led Eleanor toward the side doors, the matriarch twisted back, her voice sharp and trembling. You'll regret this, Aurora. You think anyone will believe you once this settles. You're nothing without this family. The room recoiled. Even the agents stiffened at the venom in her tone. Aurora finally turned toward her, her expression almost tender. The kind of tenderness you reserve for someone who has no idea how thoroughly they've already lost. I tried to give you grace, she said quietly, but you mistook it for weakness. She stepped forward, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to command the entire room without raising her voice. You want to talk about what I am without your family. A small, knowing smile tugged at her lips. Then we should clear that up. A soft click echoed as she tapped the remote again. The screen shifted. Not a document. Not a video. A DNA report. Chase froze mid-step. Eleanor's face drained of color. Miles looked like he'd been punched. The guests leaned closer, sensing another seismic blow. Aurora held the room perfectly in her hand. This, she said, gesturing to the report, was part of the material I kept in case things ever got dangerous. The header caught everyone's attention. Paternity confirmation, legal certified analysis. Beneath it, father, Chase Henderson, 0% probability. Father, unknown, see additional notes. A gasp tore through the ballroom. Even the agents paused. Chase staggered toward the screen. What is this? Aurora, what are you? Her gaze didn't waver. You know exactly what it is, Chase. I gave you every chance to tell the truth yourself. He shook his head violently. No, this is impossible. We had an agreement. Aurora raised one eyebrow. An agreement to lie. Chase fell silent. Eleanor stared at her son, realization hitting her in waves. Fear, betrayal, fury folding over each other. You knew, she whispered, voice cracking. You knew all this time. Chase didn't answer. He didn't dare. Aurora continued, her voice smooth, even. I found out the truth months before you served the divorce papers. I knew you weren't the father. And instead of having a difficult conversation like an adult, you tried to declare me unfit, medically unstable, so you could wash your hands of the situation without scrutiny. She let the next sentence land with quiet precision. But the irony, Chase, is that the child isn't yours because you're not capable of being a father at all. A stunned silence fell over the room. Chase's jaw trembled. Eleanor clutched her pearls, breath shallow. Miles whispered something that sounded like a prayer and a curse at the same time. Aurora tapped the remote again. A second page appeared. Medical assessment, male infertility, long-term, non-reversible. Signed. Dated. Verified. You thought you could humiliate me, Aurora said softly, before I ever told anyone the truth. Because deep down, you knew the moment this came out, your family's legacy would crack. The guests murmured, shock, pity, outrage, blending into a single electric hum. A councilwoman whispered. He blamed her for something he physically couldn't. A CEO muttered. He tried to destroy her to cover his own weakness. Aurora's tone never rose. She didn't need volume. She had truth. The man who is the father, she said, wanted to be here tonight. The murmurs intensified. But I told him no. Because this wasn't about him. This was about clearing the lies you built around my life. Her voice gentled, still sharp beneath the softness, but warm enough that the room instinctively leaned closer. My child will grow up surrounded by people who choose love over legacy, truth over ego. She looked at Chase for the last time, really looked at him. You never had the capacity for either. Chase's face collapsed, not rage this time, but something much smaller. Something he'd spent years hiding. Fear. Federal agents resumed leading the family toward the exit. Eleanor shouting, Chase silent, Miles defeated. Aurora turned away from them fully now. Done. Finished. Released. But the story wasn't over. Because just as the ballroom began to settle, just as Aurora prepared to step down from the stage, a familiar voice cut through the murmurs. Aurora. She froze. That voice. The crowd parted, instinctively giving way. And the man who stepped through the center aisle changed the energy of the room instantly. Powerful presence. Steady gaze. The kind of man who didn't need a title to command respect. He was the one secret Aurora hadn't planned to reveal. But life had a way of choosing its own timing. He walked toward her, eyes never leaving hers. And the entire ballroom, hundreds of witnesses who had just watched the Henderson dynasty collapse, held its breath again. Aurora didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. She knew that voice, not in the way you recognize someone from memory, but in the way you feel a shift in the air and instinctively know who entered the room. The murmurs faded to a hush as the man walked toward the stage, each step slow, deliberate, commanding without effort. When she finally faced him, the ballroom seemed to narrow until it was just the two of them. Daniel Sterling. The one person she had kept out of this night, not because he was a secret shame, but because he was the only truth she wasn't ready to expose. Tall, collected, impossibly calm despite the chaos around them, Daniel stopped a respectful distance from the stage. His presence carried the weight of someone powerful enough to be feared, but gentle enough to be trusted. Aurora, he said again, quiet, steady, warm. The room absorbed every syllable. Chase, still surrounded by agents, stiffened in place. Eleanor twisted violently toward the sound, practically choking on outrage. Miles muttered something that sounded like, No, it can't be him. But Aurora kept her expression composed. You weren't supposed to be here, she said, her voice soft but clear enough for the entire ballroom to hear. Daniel didn't smile, but his gaze softened. I wasn't going to stay away while you faced them alone. A ripple moved through the crowd, recognition dawning. People whispered his name like a myth resurfacing. Daniel Sterling, founder of Sterling Innovations, philanthropist, billionaire, a man whose influence stretched across industries and continents. And suddenly, the DNA test results made a lot more sense. Chase's eyes widened, realization hitting him like a blow. You, he breathed, voice trembling. You're the father. Daniel did not look at Chase. He didn't need to. His eyes remained on Aurora. If she wants me involved, he said evenly and without ego, yes. The room exhaled collectively, shock and awe melding into reverent silence. Aurora's pulse thundered in her ears, but her face stayed still, graceful. Daniel, she said gently, tonight wasn't about us. It was about ending their lies. He nodded once, slow, understanding her completely. And now that you've ended them, he replied, you deserve to walk out of this room with your truth, not their shadows. His words weren't grand gestures. They were the kind of steady, grounded promises that come only from a man with nothing to prove. Federal agents resumed escorting the Hendersons away, but even their departure felt small compared to the tension gathering between Aurora and Daniel. Eleanor hissed as she passed, voice sharp with venom. You think this is a victory? You think he'll stay once the scandal settles? Aurora didn't turn. Daniel did. He glanced at Eleanor the way someone might look at a wasp nest, brief, unbothered, mildly inconvenienced. I've stayed through worse storms than your family, he said quietly. Eleanor recoiled as if slapped. Aurora stepped down from the stage, her gown whispering across the marble floor. When she reached Daniel, he offered his hand, not possessive, not demanding, simply there if she wanted it. She didn't take it. Not yet. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him with the same measured restraint she used on every major decision. I didn't want you dragged into their chaos. Daniel's answer was calm, almost amused. You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked in. A whisper of a smile touched her lips, small, rare, genuine. Around them, guests watched with reverent silence, as though witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. Aurora took a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You came anyway, she said. I always will, he replied. This time, she took his hand. The room shifted, an exhale of relief, admiration, awe. Not because she'd chosen him, but because she finally chose herself enough to accept someone who wanted her without conditions. As they walked toward the exit, reporters whispered, cameras hovered, and shocked donors parted like the Red Sea. But Aurora didn't look back. Not at the stage. Not at the destroyed Henderson Empire. Not at Chase collapsing under the weight of his own ruin. Outside, cold air brushed her face, clean, sharp, honest. Daniel held the door open, but didn't guide her. He didn't need to. Aurora stepped into the night with the quiet strength of someone who survived not because she was chosen, but because she chose herself. Behind her, chaos swallowed the Henderson name. Ahead of her, a new life waited, one built on truth, not fear. As the car door closed, Daniel leaned slightly closer. What now? He asked. Aurora looked out at the city lights, bright, open, startlingly full of possibility. Now, she said, a confident calm settling in her chest, I build something they can't burn down. Daniel nodded. And I'll be right here. Aurora turned to him, steady, wise, unbroken. I know. The car pulled away from the hotel, leaving behind scandal, betrayal, and the remnants of a dynasty that once tried to destroy her. Tonight, the truth won. Tonight, Aurora reclaimed her name. Tonight, she rewrote the ending. And it wasn't revenge. It was rebirth.